Hey everybody, welcome back. Good morning to you guys. Hopefully you're doing really well, staying healthy and safe. It's Monday, April 20th, and here we are for Intro to Philosophy, Chapman. Good to see you guys. Just gonna get started in a minute. It's 9:58, so we still have just a few seconds before class time. Okay. Hello, good morning there, William. Okay. All right. Good morning, Kaylee. Good morning, everybody else. Anyone that wants, feel free anytime. Just chime in, a little hello or anything else. Hey, Jessica, Bridger, everybody. Good to see you guys. Hopefully everyone's doing well and staying healthy. I don't know if anyone's watching this new documentary on Michael Jordan. That's pretty interesting. I feel like a lot of us on the quarantine are watching these big touchstone programs and so on. Hey, Lily. So that was my plan last night. Kind of nice. Cool. Get comfortable. We will be ready to roll here in just a bit. Good morning, Brian. Okay, well, pretty much ready to get started. So welcome back, everybody. Happy to see you guys this morning. Let me just start off with some quick, questions and announcements. Did any of you guys notice my Blackboard message to the class? I sent that yesterday. It just had the essay prompts. So I thought we could start today by just going over those, making sure that that was delivered properly and everyone saw it, right? If you haven't, definitely go to your inbox and double check. But I did a mass mailing to the class yesterday. So who saw it? As long as I see even one, then that's all I need to know. Okay, good. So you did get it. Those are the essay prompts for essay 2, and a couple of things I wanted to mention about it. So for starters, I adjusted the due date. Okay, so I moved the due date out by 1 week. Originally in the syllabus, you would see it listed May 4th, Monday, May 4th. But I wanted to give us ample time and to make sure that everyone's, fully comfortable in their process of working on it. So I'm going to add 1 week. So it's going to be due Monday, May 11th. That's 3 weeks from today. Okay, so you got 3 full weeks to work on it. There's 3 optional prompts. So let me read over the text of the document that I sent you. Okay, so it starts by just saying that you must write a 3 to 4 page essay, double-spaced, in 12-point font with normal margins on exactly one of these 3 topics below. Okay, so about those just format guidelines. Yes, it's 3 to 4 pages of double-spaced, 12-point font writing with normal margins. So in that case, like I think I said for the first essay, if you felt that 4 pages was not enough and you felt constrained by that limitation, then it's okay in my mind for you to go over 4 pages. Feel free to take additional space if you need a little more than just the 4 pages. But anything that's less than the minimum requirement, less than 3 pages, is probably not going to be sufficiently detailed. So I look at it as the upper boundary of 4 pages is flexible, but the lower boundary of 3 pages is a little bit more concrete. So try your best not to, deviate from that part of the instructions. And, don't mess with the formatting. I want everyone's paper to respect the guidelines. So it's got to be 12-point font, not bigger, double-spaced, not something beyond that, and normal margins. And then I would say try to provide like a small header on the first page of writing. But if you don't, then have a separate cover page, because I basically don't want the first actual page of writing to be halfway consumed with the title and identifying information and all of that. Okay, now it says write on one of the topics. There's 3 options, but just pick one, whichever one of the 3 that you thought you'd have the easiest time reporting on, or that you think you could write the best essay about, then just pick that one, and then don't write on the other two. And then it says, no internet resources or assistance are permitted, and that's definitely required. So you're not supposed to write this paper with consideration of what anyone else in the whole world has ever said or written about it, except for you, me, and the book. So no, you can't find material somewhere else. I wish that you could think about this as though there's no such thing as electricity, and what you're even writing this paper on is a typewriter. There's no such thing as the internet. People only have books, and they write things down either physically with a pen or pencil or on a typewriter machine. So your computer's turned into a glorified electronic typewriter. We have not gone over dualism, Brian. That's, if you look at the schedule, the topic du jour for today and for the next couple of meetings, but we will go over it. So anybody looking at the first prompt, which I was just about to mention, would probably want to delay getting started on it until at least after this weekend, so that you've heard a little bit more about those subjects and that we've read a little bit more in the book. But yes, Brian, that's something that we will cover this week and next. Anyways, I was just trying to say you can't use the internet, basically. And if you did, it's not okay. So just make sure that you keep that in mind. Next up, it's due Monday, May 11th, as I said. So it's 3 weeks from today. It's worth 25% of your grade. So your first essay was 15%. The midterm was 30. That adds to 45% of the basis. This is 25 more, so that gets us to 70. And then there's the final exam, which is the last thing. During finals week, you'll see the date and time for that in the syllabus. And that's the last 30% of your grade, just like the midterm was 30. So anyway, we have two things left. It's the second essay and the final. For the final, we will worry about that a little later. I'll give you guys the study guide for it, about 10 days or so before the test, and we will have multiple review sessions to kind of get prepared for it. But anyway, that's it. We're going to start working on this paper, and then we'll look forward to the final as we get a little closer to the last few weeks. So anyway, here are the 3 prompts, and I'll just read them off and talk about them. So the first one says, monism and dualism. And that, like you said, Brian, and yes, it's true, that's the topic that we will start on today. So it's okay if you don't understand everything obviously written in the prompt. The vocabulary and the terminology that's used here is something that we will all understand better over the next few days. Since we have an additional week to work on the paper, we should be fine if you chose to write on this option. So what the first prompt says is monism/dualism. Explain the concept of dualism and monism, and then explain the concept of supervenience physicalism. You may refer to the works of Descartes, Stoljar, Smart, and Turing. So these are 4 authors that we'll go over on this subject. Finally, state your own view of which thesis you prefer and why. So at the end of that prompt, you'd also have to say whether you thought monism or dualism was the more plausible perspective, okay, and why. So again, bear with me as we go over those topics this week, and then you'll have a very detailed understanding of everything mentioned in the prompt: monism, dualism, supervenience, and all that. Okay, so the second prompt is about time and the metaphysics of time. This is something that we're just finishing, and I have some closing remarks on it today to begin after I finish with this prompt discussion. But anyway, that's the second prompt. What it says is this: explain the way that Einstein changed the understanding of time with his theory of relativity. Using our assigned readings, class lectures, and video presentations, explain the idea of the relativity of simultaneity, the 3 ways that time is like space according to Ted Sider, and the way that space-time theory eliminates the idea that time moves. Finally, state whether you prefer Einstein's concept of time or the classical view that existed before him and why. So if this is your choice of prompt, then you'd just talk about a couple of things. You would explain how the relativity of simultaneity is shown in this lightning bolt example. You'd explain the inner workings of the example and how it defines simultaneity, and also how it shows it to be relative if we modify the condition of the observer. You would then demonstrate how Ted Sider says that there are puzzles and paradoxes accounting for how time moves. And then you would explain how the space-time theory allows us to avoid commitment to the idea that time moves, and therefore it has that benefit. Finally, in the end, you'd say whether you thought Einstein's space-time theory or the classical Newtonian view, which says that space and time are not related to each other, which one you thought was better, more plausible, and why. Okay, so that's another prompt that's optional for you if you want to talk about time. It mentions video presentations, which are something that, of course, I didn't get to show you because our class format changed. But there's a couple of, like there was a film I would have shown and a little documentary on Einstein that I would have shown. Maybe I can try to find the links to those, but if I cannot, then just don't worry about it, obviously. And I'm just going to take it that the text is the only needed material for that prompt, the essays that we read from Einstein, Sider, and David Lewis. Okay. Then finally, the third prompt gives you the option of writing on epistemology, the theory of knowledge. So what it says is this: explain the classical idea that knowledge can be defined by three separately necessary and jointly sufficient conditions. Okay, so first of all, you would have to talk about how knowledge was defined by the ancient Greeks as justified true belief. You'd have to talk about what those different conditions are, and then to explain why each one is necessary, but they're not sufficient unless they're all taken together. You'd have to demonstrate examples where, for say the sake of argument, a person satisfied 2 out of the 3 criteria, but not the other one. And you'd have to give a couple of different examples like that to put forward the intuition that that would not be knowledge if even one of the conditions was failed. So that's the first part of the prompt. And you could also talk about the article by Plato where Socrates discusses the definition of knowledge and where he makes a point to explain that justification is key, since that's what converts a correct opinion into knowledge, and that justification has a role similar to the role of ropes in the analogy with the Daedalus statues. Because like those ropes that keep the beautiful statue from leaving, justification secures your true beliefs so that they won't leave your mind or that you won't forget about them. So yes, after that, you would go into the description of these Gettier cases. So it says next explain how Gettier showed that the classical definition was insufficient. So in that second part of the prompt, you'd have to talk about those Gettier cases and indicate to the reader, walk us through the case and show how they demonstrate that you could have a justified true belief, but still not have knowledge, and how that indicates that the definition provided by the Greeks is not actually sufficient. And then finally discuss whether you like the older classical account, JTB, or did you think Gettier's criticism of it pretty much showed that it was wrong? And which of those 2 perspectives do you believe and why? So those are 3 prompts. Any student can start working on it whenever they like, but I would advise that if you're going to think about number 1, maybe you give yourself a few of the class meetings this week to see if you want to get into that topic and just get a taste of it first. So anyway, yeah, as we get closer to the due date, as people have worked on drafts, anybody who wants to ask for feedback or commentary, I'm happy to help. But you just have to find time to send me a message if you want to do that, and if you have advanced copy ready with enough time for me to give you some feedback. So anyway, that's it. That's the next prompt or paper that's due in 3 weeks. I'm always happy to take questions about it, either in live stream or through email or in face-to-face Skype call if anyone ever wants to do one. So basically that's that. We're looking ahead to the next couple things. After that, it's the final, and we'll be focused on the final as we get closer to the end of the semester, and I give you the study guide. But for now anyway, you have your prompts and 3 weeks to work on it. Okay, does that sound good for you guys? Just kind of wanted to clarify those matters while we had the opening point in today's lecture. So I wanted to close out the discussion of time, and we didn't have much left to say about it, but let me go back to where we were last Friday, and then I have just 1 or 2 points to add. So David Lewis was the last author on the subject of time and the metaphysics of time. His paper was called Paradoxes of Time Travel, and he basically argues in the paper that time travel is not impossible, even if it's weird. That's all it is, just weird, but not like literally contradictory or impossible. So his goal in the paper is to try and explain why the paradoxes of time travel do not make it impossible. So the first thing he talks about is how can 2 events be separated by 2 different amounts of time? Like if a person gets in a time machine and they spend 5 minutes according to their watch, but when they step out, it's 10 years in the future. How much time was spent between when they got in and when they got out? Is it 10 years or is it 5 minutes? It seems like both, and that might appear to be a contradiction right there. But Lewis dismisses this paradox by saying, well, there's actually now 2 different time frames. There's personal time and external time. And once we show that there's these 2 different measurements of time, there's no longer any paradox, because what we would say in our case here is that the individual spent 5 minutes of personal time in the machine, but 10 minutes of external time passed relative to all the other clocks. So one paradox dismissed. Personal and external time helps us to make sense of those puzzling expressions, like in 5 minutes, I'll be 10 years ahead. Okay, the second paradox was about how many people are having a conversation if a time traveler goes back and, like, say, calls himself on the phone when they were younger. Is that 2 people or is it 1? It seems like both answers have some degree of rational support. For example, just looking at the 2 people on either side of the phone call, it would look like 2 people. But then again, it's like you're talking to yourself in the past, so how is that 2 people? Well, Lewis's explanation of this paradox is that this is 1 person, but it's 2 temporal parts of the same person. The later part in the time sequence talking to the earlier part in the time sequence. And since temporal parts are claimed to be real, and since there is one located at each moment in the timeline of your existence, the time traveler going back and looping back to the past would in fact encounter their previous temporal part in that part of space-time. So no paradox at all, because one object or human being has a series of different temporal parts, not merely the one at the present moment. So second paradox eliminated. The third one had to do with the closed causal loops. So like if you told yourself in the past how to build a time machine, and then that past self built it using the instructions given on the phone, and then when they arrived at the future, they decided to go back to tell themselves. It seems like this whole thing goes in a loop, and the question is begged, where did the information about how to build it come from in the first place? It seems like it just came out of thin air. Lewis concedes that these are very weird possibilities, these loops, but he says it's no weirder than the idea that the universe has always existed, or that it sprang into existence out of nothing, or that God, maybe the creator of the universe, has no ultimate origin or explanation. So if these things are things that we're prepared to accept, then he doesn't see how the loops that we're speaking of are any more or less odd than those. Okay, and then the last thing, and this is just what I wanted to quickly speak about one last time. The final suggested paradox of time travel that David Lewis mentions involves this character named Tim. We talked about that, right? So Tim wants to kill his grandfather, but he wants to do so in the past, and he goes back to the past, prepared to kill his grandfather, but if he does do this, then he will have killed the grandfather prior to the time where the grandfather fathered the parent of this time-traveling grandson. So when you think about that scenario and you ask the question, can he kill his grandfather or not, it seems like 2 different answers seem plausible or reasonable. On the one hand, just looking at the fact that he's there in the past with a clear motivation and means to kill the grandfather, it would seem like, sure, he should be able to do it. Why not? On the other hand, though, when you take a step back and you look at the bigger picture, it would appear that no, he obviously cannot succeed, because if he did, then the timeline of history would be contradictory. It would both include the birth of this man named Tim, but it would also somehow annihilate the birth of this man named Tim because of the assassination of the grandfather in the past. And since Tim is there with the attempt to do so, it seems that he was, after all, born, so he will inevitably fail. Now, Lewis says that the most reasonable, non-contradictory way this scenario would play out is that he is going to fail. But he'll fail for some common sense basic reason, like he'll just miss his shot or the gun will jam or whatever. But what about the paradoxical thought that he both can and cannot? Okay, so here's the last one thing I wanted to add. Lewis says this paradox can also be eliminated by understanding an ambiguity in the use of the word can. And so he says there are 2 senses to the one word can. Okay, so 2 senses of the word can. Okay, so he distinguishes what he calls the narrow sense of the word and then the broad sense of the word. So the narrow sense of the word can refers to what one is able to do given a more limited set of facts, a narrower set of facts. What one is able to do based on a narrower or more limited range of facts. The broad sense of the word can is about what one is able to do based on or given a more broad or more inclusive set of facts. So what one is able to do based on a broader range of facts. Sorry, to get that spelling correctly for you. A broader range of facts. Okay, so this is a distinction that Lewis thinks can help to dispel this last apparent paradox of time travel, the question of being whether one could change the past in a way that alters events from how they did play out initially. Because it seems like maybe he can, since he's there. It also seems like maybe he can't, since we already know, with the benefit of hindsight, that the grandfather was not assassinated in that time and date. Now, can. Take the word can. When we use the word can in the sense of possibility, we're talking about what is possible. Can you do it or can you not do it? Meaning, is it possible to do or not possible? The thing is, though, this word in and of itself harbors some ambiguity, and it's ambiguous between these two interpretations of the word. So to help explain this, I'm going to use an example that Lewis uses in the essay. So here's a question that may seem pretty straightforward to you. Can you speak Russian? There's a straight up direct question. Can you speak Russian? Now, what would be your most common sense answer to this question? What do you think? Can you speak Russian? Just, I don't know. Can you? What do you think? What would be someone asks you that, like I am asking you, what would you say back? You're saying no. Okay, good. And I figure that would probably be the most basic answer. Because what you're thinking is, no, I've never learned that language. I don't know the vocabulary. I have not studied it. You know, so like university students here in California, for the most part, probably have not taken on that as a second language. So you're saying, no, I can't. But now let me ask you this question slightly differently and see if we have a different response. And see, so you're already kind of, I think, seeing the nuance in where I'm going with this. If I compare you to a pet dog, right, can you speak Russian? Compared to, let's say, a dog or a cat, can you speak Russian? Now what would be maybe the answer given? Can you, a human being, speak Russian in contrast to, let's say, a dog? Yes, you can. Okay. Now, it looked like you gave me contradictory answers. When I first asked you, can you speak Russian? You say no. Then I said, well, can you speak Russian relative to a dog? And you say yes. So what's going on with the two different answers? Well, it has to do with the two senses of the word can. Okay, so when you say that no, I can't, you're just focusing on what facts about yourself. When you say that you can't, when you say no, I cannot speak Russian, in that answer, you're just referring to what information about yourself at this time. That, for example, what? Why would one say, in your position, no? That you don't know the language, okay, good. So like that you have not yet studied it, that you've not yet embarked on a course of study to attain the mastery of this language, right? That you don't currently have the ability based on your current knowledge, exactly. But when I ask you the question, in relation to a dog, in comparison to a dog, can you speak Russian? Now you say yes, but you're thinking about a more inclusive set of facts. So what leads a person to give the yes answer when it is contrasted against the case of the dog? Now you're just thinking about what facts concerning yourself. Like, for example, basic facts such as what? What would lead one to give the yes answer if they think about this bigger picture? They would say yes, perhaps, because they're thinking that overall, what? We've heard the basis for the no answer. Now I'm just trying to ask you for the basis for the possible yes answer. That you are a human capable of learning new languages, exactly. So you, just as much as anybody else, have the innate capacity to master a new language if you set your mind to it and if you undertake the course of study to become a capable, fluent speaker of that language. So yeah, you can, in the sense that it's possible in the big sense of what you're able to do as a human. But no, you can't in the narrower sense if we just limit ourselves to the facts about what you've already studied so far. Okay? So now, when we say that Tim looks like he can kill his grandfather, wait, it also looks like he can't. We're employing the senses of can in two different ways. So when we think that it looks like he can, we're focused just on the more limited circumstances that he's in, just basically looking at the fact that he's there, that he's got the weapon, and that he has the full intent to do that. If you just look at those facts, you'd say, sure, he can. But when you take a step back and you look at the bigger picture that he is in, and you realize that he ultimately was born at a later date, and that therefore nothing preventing his birth must have occurred, then in that larger context, it seems like he inevitably cannot succeed in his attempt at the assassination. So in a way, Lewis is telling us we get to have it both ways. He can when you just focus on a more narrow range of facts, just that he's there, basically. But he can't when you step back and look at this big picture and you see that he's prevented from doing so by the way that events are destined to play out. Now, at the end of teaching this subject, which we're now basically done with, I always want to bring it home to something of a little bit more relevance to your everyday thoughts and experience. Because I understand that teaching the subject of time, metaphysics of time, and time travel, somebody could be forgiven for thinking, well, how does that relate to me? It seems pretty abstract. It's pretty far out material. What's the relevance to my daily life? Well, I would put this out there as just one philosophically important connection to you. If the space-time theory is correct, and it's not just weird time travel scenarios where we have to think about people being unable to do otherwise. It's everyday life too. Because think about it, right? In the space-time theory, every event of the entire universe, including all the future moments, are equally real. So it's not like there are future moments which have an indeterminate quality, which could play out in any different number of ways. If the space-time theory is correct, every event is fully formed and set in stone, as it were, in the big block universe. Every dimension along a four-dimensional graph of the universe is fully in place. And according to that, you are also not really able to do otherwise. So here, let me ask you this question. You're watching this lecture right now, if you're even seeing this, right? So that's what's going on right now. But do you think that it's possible that you could have missed this lecture today? Do you think that there's a possibility that you could not be watching this lecture, even though you are? I know you're watching it. But do you find in your mind that it could have been that you didn't watch this lecture this morning? So William, you say yes. Okay. What is it about yourself that makes you think that that's possible? Because you're thinking things like this. Well, I mean, I'm watching it, but I could have perhaps chosen not to, or I could have overslept, or I could have been sick and unable to tune in at this time, right? You're thinking of those thoughts, like, though I'm watching it, here are a whole bunch of counterfactual possibilities that could have played out, and that's why it's only contingently true that I'm watching it. I might not have. But in the space-time theory way of looking at it, if that theory is true, then there's also a sense in which you could not possibly have missed this lecture. And why? Because, as it turns out, here we see that you are watching it. And so what that means is that this event included in your timeline, this temporal part of you watching this lecture, was always on this point in your overall time sequence. And therefore, you actually inevitably were going to watch this lecture, and there's no way you possibly could have failed to see it. So that's where I think it starts to get really trippy and interesting for the individual when you think about the metaphysics here. Because if the space-time theory is true, then it's not like just a weird time traveler who fails inevitably in his attempt to change the past. It's also all of us just living in our everyday lives. You're not able to do otherwise any more than Tim is able to alter the order of events. So you're not going to be able to ever have missed this lecture because you didn't, in fact, watch it. And that, I guess, would imply that every event contained within your whole future is something that is bound to happen, and it cannot play out in an alternative way, which is very strange thought, right? You think of yourself as being able to do whatever you like and that you have the freedom to do so. But according to this theory, the counterfactual, non-realized possibilities are merely fictions, and the only one course of events that is going to play out is the actual course of events. Now, I think that this is so, to me as a professor of philosophy, interesting, because when you teach students things like, there's contingency. And so although, one team won the Super Bowl, it could have been the other team, right? Sometimes when students hear the idea of contingency, they're like, what does that mean though? Because the team did win. So you're talking about a counterfactual possible world? How weird is that? There's only the actual world. But then when I tell you, no, there's nothing you can do except for what you actually do, now you become like the philosopher, spinning your wheels, thinking about different possible worlds, the possible world where I was sleeping right now and not watching this lecture. But I mean, according to the space-time theory of physics, these counterfactual possibilities are not going to be realized, and they're merely ideas in the mind. So while you compare the actual course of events to mental fictions about what you could have done otherwise, the metaphysician of space-time reminds you that those other non-realized possibilities couldn't have happened. And you can't prove otherwise to me. There's no way where you're going to be able to show yourself doing something other than what you actually did. Only your actual behavior is ever displayed in this universe. So thinking about, doing something different. Here's an eraser. Shall I pick it up or not? What's going to happen? What's my destiny? To pick it up, so I'm not going to. Oh wait, yes I am. No, you see, look, what I just did there didn't demonstrate or display the breaking of the chain of events that was bound to happen. It's made me thinking about alternative possibilities to the one actual action, but then only one real action is elicited or produced. So that's very strange, right? If you fully understand this theory, then you are just as set and locked in to a pattern of events as any of these time travelers. And therefore, I just wish you good luck, because I guess you need good luck, since your whole future already exists. But anyway, trippy, heady material, something food for thought for all of us to take away. But now that that little part of your destiny or whatever it is over with, we're going to move on, and we're going to continue in our class to start talking about a new topic. Okay, guys? So it's transition points, done with time for the moment, and we're heading into the philosophy of mind now. So I'm going to erase and start to give you some new notes on that. Okay, so now philosophy of mind. The philosophy of mind. So many different topics in philosophy and subject areas. There's philosophy of religion, ethics, epistemology, metaphysics of time, and also this big topic, which is, as you see there, philosophy of mind. So what's it about? Philosophy of mind is all about the concept of consciousness, thought, perception, experience, feeling. See, me and you are conscious beings, meaning that we have subjective experience and the ability to perceive things. Not everything in the world has consciousness, obviously. Like this table, this marker, that whiteboard, these are not conscious beings. They're not experiencing things. They're not perceiving this lecture and thinking about the interesting material. They're not feeling pleasure, pain, hope, regret, fear, or anything else. They just have no consciousness whatsoever. They're inanimate objects. They're non-living matter. But me and you do have consciousness, and that's an extremely fascinating thing. We're not just objects like furniture, but we think and feel and perceive. So we have a point of view and a perspective. That's one of the most unique things in the universe, the existence of consciousness. Imagine a universe without it, just be a bunch of matter, but no one thinking about it or seeing any of it or experiencing any of it. So for better or worse, hopefully for the better, we're conscious beings. And philosophers are interested in the whole concept of what consciousness is and how do we get it? Where does it derive from? Is it totally just based on physical stuff? Is it just the physical brain and the matter and the neurochemistry and biology of the brain? Is that the whole enchilada when it comes to consciousness? Or is there something non-physical about it? Like, is there something more spiritual, like there's a soul or like a ghost in this physical frame, as it were, a ghost in the machine of your body? So is consciousness totally based on brain activity and neurochemistry, or is it something that escapes a purely physical analysis? That's some of the big questions here. So I'm going to write what some of the big questions are within this field of philosophy. Big questions include these. So for one, are the mind and the brain two different things, or are they the same? Okay, so we all know there's a brain, like in your head. That's the physical, spongy, material that is at the seat of your consciousness. At least that's what we believe according to science, correct? So the thing is, though, not everyone agrees. Is this brain the only thing that is responsible for your consciousness? Is that the mind itself? Or is the mind somehow something that can be separate and understood separately from the brain? Is there like a soul or spirit inhabiting your body which could survive and exist even if the body was completely returned to dust, as it inevitably would be? So that's one question. Is the brain the entire basis for consciousness? Or is there something that escapes the physical, that's different from the physical? We could call it a mind. Is the mind just the brain, or is it something that's non-physical, separate from it? Okay, another question, and it's related to the first, so there's a little overlap here. But another question based on this whole idea is, could consciousness be explained physically? Can or could consciousness be explained on an entirely physical basis? So consciousness, I mean, just think about your own consciousness right now. You're having the perception of taking in this lecture, and if your mind wanders from the topic at hand, maybe you're thinking about activities that you need to do later on today, or social things, or entertainment, things that have nothing to do with this lecture. But whatever's going on in your brain or mind, could that be explained entirely on a physical basis, like the neurotransmitters and synapses of the brain firing off? Is that something that can give a 100% analysis and explanation of your thoughts, hopes, dreams, perceptions, and so forth? Or is there something about consciousness that is too rich to ever be fully understood or explained on an entirely physical basis? So can we reduce consciousness to the physical operations of the brain and its chemistry? Or is there something about consciousness that defies a physical understanding? Okay. And a third question that we will touch on in the class as we go over this topic next week, pretty much: could a machine ever think? Could a machine ever have consciousness? What I wrote there says, could a machine ever have consciousness? Question, could it? We're living now in a time of history where we're getting more and more advanced computer programming and artificial intelligence. And some people do wonder about whether it's possible to have such a sophisticated artificial intelligent computer that it actually would have consciousness like what we have. Is it possible to engineer or create a conscious being through the electrical, chemical, and etc. components that we build in computing? Now, some people think that that is something possible. Maybe we have not done it yet, but that it's something that remains a theoretical possibility. And so other people don't. Other people say, no matter what a computer does, even if you were sitting with a robot and it was asking you, how was your day, and it started crying and telling you about its feelings, you might say, well, that's just a very, very well-programmed computing system, but there's nothing it's actually feeling inside. It's not actually having any experiences. But that's a debate. We're going to read at least one author, Alan Turing, in fact, the forefather and creator of the digital computer, who way back in 1950, in the infancy stages of computing intelligence and machinery, wrote a paper, famous paper, where he makes the case that eventually, yes, computers will in fact have consciousness and thought. And he's saying that way back in 1950 is a pretty bold and visionary thing to be claiming, because the computers that existed at that time were very, very primitive compared to even the most basic computing systems that we have now. So we'll look at that debate too. if consciousness could be found in a machine, then that would go some ways probably towards establishing that maybe it is just based on the physical. But anyway, we're going to investigate all these debates and more. So I next want to tell you guys about the two main positions in the philosophy of mind. So like as you've all learned, in every area of philosophy, there's disagreement. In philosophy of religion, some people are theists, some people are atheists, and they state their opposing arguments in the marketplace of ideas, and we just examine their arguments, right? Come to our own conclusions based on them. In ethics, similar. You've got consequentialist utilitarians, you've got deontological Kantians. They argue for the superiority of their ethical theory as compared to the others, and they define their reasons in their essays. When it was epistemology, we had one theory of knowledge that came from the ancient Greeks, but then we had these more contemporary writers that said, no, that theory is incorrect, and here are some examples to show why. And just now in the metaphysics of time, we had Newton's theory that said time and space are independent, they have nothing to do with each other, but then Einstein showing us that according to his results, space and time are interwoven, and there's one unified structure, including all the past, present, and future. So all areas of philosophy contain debates between fundamental positions that people take, which are then argued for. And in the philosophy of mind, there's also the same kind of structural feature where you have people on either sides of one debated topic. So here's the two main positions in the philosophy of mind, and this is now starting to open up that whole understanding of monism and dualism. Okay, so two main positions in the philosophy of mind. Okay, so what we have are, on the one hand, monism. On the other hand, what is called dualism. Okay, so these are two rival schools of thought in the philosophy of mind. With monism and dualism, the distinction between them is about how many substances are claimed to compose all of reality. Monists believe that the entire universe and everything in it is made out of only one kind of substance. So let me put that here. Everything in the universe is made out of only one kind of substance. Okay, so that's monism. Quickly, I'm going to just state the definition of dualism so we can get that out there, and then we'll talk more. So dualism is the alternative, which says that everything in the universe is not made out of just one kind of substance, but instead two. So everything in the universe is made out of two kinds of substance. Okay, monism, it's all made out of one kind of substance. Dualism, everything made out of two kinds of substance. Monism has the prefix mono built in, which means one. So like monogamy, one partner. Monologue, one person speaking on stage in a theater play. Mono channel speakers, one audio channel. Okay, so anyway, monism has that prefix built into it because it's saying, yes, that everything in this universe is just made out of one kind of substance. Dualism, when you talk about a duo, that's a thing of two, so two substances. Now, what are these two substances that are mentioned by either of these two theories? That's what's next. So, what are two different kinds of substance? Okay, so one is physical matter. And the other just called mind. So the definition of physical matter, one possible type of substance, is anything that is extended in space. So anything that occupies some region of space is a physical object or is made out of physical matter. So anything that is extended in space. And question, what is known as usually the term for the most minimal bit of matter? What do you think? Have we talked about this? I think maybe, but let's just repeat that. When you get matter and you break it down into smaller and smaller units, they talk about the atom, that's right, okay? And I know that there's sometimes our discussion of subatomic fundamental particles, but we'll just talk about atoms for the sake of convenience because this is, after all, philosophy class. So atoms, good. Anything that is extended in space, that's physical matter, and I'm just going to put the term atoms right here in parentheses because that's basically what is claimed here. Atoms. So one kind of substance that might be responsible for building everything up are material atoms. Another type of substance that's contrasted with matter is mind. Okay, now mind in the terminology used by philosophers means something specific. It means something that does not have extension at all in space. So no mass, no shape, no volume, no weight. It's literally like immaterial, completely disembodied, but yet is thinking. Okay, so it has no extension in space and is thinking. So there we see the definition of mind. To think of mind in this specific usage is to think about something kind of along the lines of a soul, a spirit, a ghost. A thing which can think, have consciousness, have thought, have perception, but which is not at all physical, not at all extended in space. So it's not to be confused with the brain, the idea of the mind. The brain is made out of matter, and it does have weight, volume, mass, and shape. The mind is instead supposed to be some immaterial consciousness that is somehow bound up together with your body and brain, but it's not the same thing, and it could somehow exist entirely disassociated with the body. So say that, you know, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and there's no brain there anymore that could function. If the mind exists, then it would persist on in this disembodied state, capable still of having thought, and so forth. Okay, so I said to you that monism claims that everything in the universe is made out of only one kind of substance. And therefore, there are two kinds of monism, depending on which of these two they think is the only substance. So I'm going to have to mention to you then two types of monism. One is called physicalism. And that's the most important one that we're going to study a lot in the class, but another kind is called idealism. Now, what physicalism says is that everything in the universe, including you and your consciousness, is made out of physical matter. So everything is made out of physical matter, including us and our consciousness. That's the physicalist branch of monism. Everything is made out of physical matter, including us and our consciousness. I'm going to have to get a little low here, but I'll put the definition of idealism above. So everything is made out of physical matter, including us and our Consciousness. Consciousness. So everything made out of physical matter, even you, even your mind and thought. That's the idea of physicalism. So that's one variety of monism. Monism says everything's made out of one substance, and the physicalist monists say that that one and only substance is atoms, is matter. So on that view, it's all made out of matter, even me and you, even our thoughts. So according to this perspective, what is the mind, or what is consciousness? It's simply a byproduct of the brain and its neurochemistry. So if there's a functioning brain, it can exhibit and produce consciousness, like what we have both got right now. But if there is no brain, or if it ceases to exist, or it ceases to function, then on physicalism, there could not be consciousness, because if everything's based on matter, then if there's no physical basis for the consciousness, then it cannot continue to exist. So there would not be any disembodied consciousness floating free of a body on this idea. There would only be consciousness found within living organisms with functioning brains. So it's entirely physical. All your thoughts and feelings and perceptions are just physical happenings resultant from the brain, and absent a brain, there's no possibility for consciousness. So that's physicalist monism. The other type is idealism. And you know what I'll do is I'll just begin the next lecture with the note on idealism, so you can remind me at the top on Wednesday. But just to give you a quick preview, idealist monism says that everything's made out of not matter, but ideas. And according to idealism, there's no such thing as matter. So what is this table and chair and everything surrounding me and you? They're just ideas that are being thought of in the mind. And therefore, matter is actually just an illusion. There's no material substance. Everything is mental, according to the idealist view. Now, most people don't take that idea too seriously anymore, though. It's 2020, and I think physicalism has kind of gained ascendancy over that over time. But there were some powerful arguments for it given a little bit previously, like in the 1800s or 1700s, George Berkeley, Christian bishop, he wrote some very detailed arguments for the case of idealism. I don't think it's as well received anymore. It obviously sounds kind of far-fetched. But anyway, it has its place. For the most part, we're going to be comparing and contrasting physicalist monism against dualism. And so the last thing I'll say today is this: dualists claim that there's both substances. It's not all just matter. It's not all just mind, but that there are both. So in the dualist perspective, there's the body that your body has and other objects have, which are made out of matter. But then there's also this immaterial soul or spirit, that's what they call the mind. And that is not of the body, and it's not of matter, but it still has consciousness. So dualists embrace both types of substances, and depending on which type of monist you are, physicalist or idealist, you would hold that there's only the one, of whichever kind. Okay, guys, so that's all I have, I guess, for us today with the time that we had. We're going to continue with this on Wednesday, so just try to read these two selections for that meeting. Descartes' Sixth Meditation, and I'll finish with that on Wednesday, and then also Daniel Stoljar and his paper on physicalism. So Descartes and Stoljar are the next two pieces to go over, and we'll just continue through our syllabus and calendar of dates. So anyway, guys, I know we got to get to our next stuff today, so thanks again so much for being here at the live stream, and appreciate all your guys' participation. Stay healthy and safe again, and I'll see you guys back on Wednesday, the 22nd. All right, take care. Bye-bye.